Lauren Hayes's heart raced as she stepped through the grand double doors of the Garden Hill Courthouse. The morning light streamed through ornate stained glass windows, scattering soft patterns of color across the polished marble floor. She was late, something that rarely occurred in her meticulously managed life. Her tailored olive blazer, hastily thrown over a crisp beige blouse, still looked impeccable despite her rushed arrival at municipal court. The courtroom was already alive with hushed conversations. Defendants filled the rows of wooden benches, their quiet murmurs reverberating off the high-arched ceiling. Lauren slid into a seat in the back row, her phone in hand as she skimmed through an onslaught of unread emails. As the co-founder of a burgeoning environmental tech company, every minute away from her desk felt like a setback. Her inbox, packed with decisions and updates, was a persistent weight in her mind. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff's stern voice carried through the room. All rise. The Honorable Judge Thomas Garrett presiding. Judge Garrett entered with a no-nonsense gait, his dark robes flowing behind him like a cape. His silver hair and sharp gaze commanded authority, his reputation for swift and unyielding judgments preceding him. He had been on the bench for over 30 years, and his courtroom was known for its strict adherence to order. Lauren observed as case after case moved through the docket with machine-like efficiency. Judge Garrett dispensed fines and decisions like clockwork, rarely pausing to truly engage with the individuals before him. Each case was another line crossed off his list, another file moved to the side of his desk. Case number 1987, Lauren Hayes, the clerk announced. Lauren stood, smoothing her taupe pencil skirt and striding to the podium. Despite the butterflies in her stomach, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who often stood before boardrooms and investors. Yet today, here in this courtroom, her confidence felt small. Ms. Hayes, Judge Garrett began, his voice edged with impatience. You've been cited for failing to stop at a pedestrian crossing on Willow and Oak Street on March 10 at 5:12 p.m. How do you plead? Lauren's voice was clear and measured. Your Honor, I do not deny being at the intersection at that time, but I would like to explain the circumstances. She reached into her leather satchel to retrieve the evidence she had prepared, printed images and a detailed account of the incident. Judge Garrett raised his hand, cutting her off. Ms. Hayes, this is a straightforward matter. The camera footage shows your vehicle moving through the crosswalk. I don't need further details. Guilty or not guilty? Lauren's brow furrowed, though she remained composed. Your Honor, I believe the evidence would clarify. I said, Judge Garrett interrupted, his tone sharpening, this court doesn't have time for unnecessary explanations. There are other cases on the docket. The dismissive tone stung. Lauren glanced around, noticing a few people shifting in their seats. They recognized the scene playing out, a defendant dismissed before she could be fully heard. In that case, Your Honor, I plead not guilty, Lauren replied, her voice firm. For the first time, Judge Garrett's gaze flicked up to meet hers. Something in her measured defiance seemed to challenge him, though it only deepened his irritation. Very well. The fine is $200, plus an additional $75 in court fees. Lauren remained still, her hands resting gently on the podium. She had faced far tougher crowds in corporate negotiations, but this felt different. Here, her credentials and achievements meant nothing. She was just another name, another case to be decided quickly. That will be all, Ms. Hayes, Judge Garrett said curtly, already flipping to the next file. Lauren turned and walked back to her seat, her steps slow and deliberate. Settling down, she pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message to her assistant, reschedule my meetings. I'll be staying here. She had initially planned to rush to the office, where her team awaited her input on their upcoming sustainability platform launch. But something compelled her to stay and observe the rest of the morning's proceedings. She had always believed innovation came from identifying flaws in broken systems, and today she was witnessing those flaws firsthand. Judge Thomas Garrett leaned back in his leather chair later that afternoon, exhaling slowly as he tugged at his tie. The golden sunlight filtering through his office blinds created long slanted shadows on the mahogany-paneled walls. His chambers, which had served as his refuge for decades, felt unusually oppressive today. "Judge?" A soft knock at the door drew his attention. It was Dana Holloway, his longtime clerk. "Yes, Dana." Garrett replied, barely looking up from the case notes scattered across his desk. "There's something you might want to see," Dana said, holding out a tablet as she stepped into the room. Her expression held an edge of hesitation. "What is it now?" he asked, his tone clipped. "We've still got the family court docket to prepare for." "It's about one of the defendants from this morning," Dana replied. "Lauren Hayes." The name registered faintly in Garrett's mind. "The traffic case?" "Yes, sir," Dana said, stepping closer to hand him the tablet. "I think you'll want to see this." Garrett took the device, frowning as he scanned the screen. A prominent headline jumped out at him: "Tech leader Lauren Hayes is transforming sustainability solutions nationwide." Beneath it was a photograph of Lauren at a conference, standing before an engaged audience as she explained her groundbreaking work. His throat tightened as he read. Lauren Hayes, a Stanford graduate and the CEO of Greencore, had developed technology that was revolutionizing the renewable energy industry. Her innovations were already being adopted by municipalities across the country to reduce carbon footprints. "There's more," Dana added gently, swiping to another article. This one named Lauren as one of the top 30 innovators under 40, applauding her work for creating accessible solutions for sustainable energy. Garrett leaned back, suddenly uneasy. The morning replayed in his mind, his curt dismissal, his refusal to hear her out. He barely let her speak. Now, reading about her accomplishments, the memory made him squirm. "Dana," he said slowly, setting the tablet down, "I need you to pull up the footage from today's hearings." Within moments, the video played on the monitor mounted on the wall. Garrett watched himself preside over case after case. He noted the clipped tone of his voice, the impatience in his movements. When Lauren's hearing appeared on screen, he could hardly watch. The way he waved off her attempt to present evidence was glaring now, unmistakable in its dismissal. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," Garrett said quietly, his voice heavy. "And see if there are any judicial bias training programs scheduled soon. It's time I signed up for one." Dana's lips curved into a faint smile, a look of quiet relief. "Already on it, sir." As she stepped out, Garrett remained in his chair, staring at the now frozen image of Lauren Hayes on the monitor. She had achieved more for the world than many would in a lifetime, and he had treated her like an inconvenience. Pulling a blank legal pad toward him, he began writing, first a formal apology to Lauren, then notes for a proposal to the Judicial Ethics Committee. The light in his chambers slowly dimmed as the sun dipped below the skyline. For the first time in years, Garrett felt something shift in his mind. Perhaps today would mark a turning point, not for his authority as a judge, but for his willingness to see the people who stood before him. Options in simple, everyday language. The demonstration proceeded seamlessly as Lauren Hayes guided her audience through the various capabilities of their platform. She clicked through common legal scenarios, traffic violations, tenant disputes, small claims filings, each one laid out in clear, accessible steps that anyone could follow. "Just last month," Lauren continued, her voice confident yet warm, "our platform supported over 12,000 people who couldn't afford traditional legal services. Take Mrs. Ramirez, for example, a grandmother who successfully used our system to fight an unfair eviction notice, or Mr. Singh, who appealed a parking fine that would have cost him half his paycheck." Lisa Chen, a reporter from Legal Tech Weekly, leaned forward, her pen poised above her notepad. "Ms. Hayes, what inspired you to create this system?" Lauren paused, considering the question. "I saw too many people being swept through a legal system they didn't understand, their rights, their options, everything seemed out of reach. Just this morning, I witnessed cases where individuals needed guidance but couldn't access it. That's why we built this, to make justice accessible for everyone." As she spoke, her tablet buzzed softly with a notification. Lauren glanced at the screen. An email had arrived from the State Judicial Office. Her keynote speech at the upcoming Judicial Technology Summit had been officially confirmed. The irony wasn't lost on her. In a few weeks, she would be speaking to judges, many of whom likely dismissed people like her in their own courtrooms. "The really exciting part," Lauren continued, pulling up a new slide on the screen, "is our latest update. We've partnered with over 200 pro bono attorneys statewide. When our AI identifies a case requiring human expertise, it automatically schedules a virtual consultation with an available lawyer." The room buzzed with murmurs of approval as Lauren demonstrated the seamless integration. The platform could now generate legal documents, remind users of critical deadlines, and even offer guidance on courtroom procedures. Every feature was meticulously designed to address the barriers Lauren had seen firsthand in countless legal proceedings. "Ms. Hayes," a man in the back raised his hand. "I heard you're being considered for the National Bar Association's Innovation Award. How does it feel to be recognized for such a significant impact?" Lauren offered a small smile, gracious but focused. "The recognition is humbling, but what truly matters is the difference we make. Every day, we hear from individuals who were able to navigate their cases successfully because of this system. That's the real achievement." The presentation wrapped up to enthusiastic applause. Lauren began gathering her notes, but a new notification flashed across her tablet. It was an email from Judge Garrett's office, a formal request for a meeting. Lauren raised an eyebrow slightly, her expression calm despite her curiosity. Turning back to the room, she addressed the group one final time. "Next month, we're launching a pilot program in 3 county courts. These courthouses will integrate our platform directly into their systems, offering on-site access to anyone who needs it." The room erupted into applause once again, but Lauren's thoughts were already racing ahead. Maybe Judge Garrett's courthouse could be the 4th pilot location. After all, transforming the system worked better from within than from the outside. Judge Thomas Garrett sat in his study late that night, the clock on his desk glowing. 1 a.m. sleep had evaded him, chased off by hours of reviewing courtroom security footage. His usual routine, a quiet dinner followed by reading, had been abandoned in favor of an uneasy reckoning with his own actions. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated the deep lines on his face as Garrett watched another recording from last week. This time, he noticed something he hadn't paid attention to before. He'd given a young white business owner over 5 minutes to explain a minor speeding infraction, but earlier that day, he'd interrupted an elderly Latina woman after barely 20 seconds. "Margaret would be ashamed of me," he muttered, his voice low and pained. His gaze drifted to a framed photo of his late wife on the desk. Margaret had been a passionate civil rights lawyer who spent her career fighting for equity in the justice system. "Justice isn't about being right," she had always told him. "It's about doing right." Garrett set the footage aside, reaching for the legal pad already full of notes. Over the past few hours, he'd meticulously documented every instance of bias in his recent cases, differences in tone, patience, and even body language. The patterns were undeniable. He'd failed not just his oath but the people who had stood before him, unseen and unheard. Walking to the kitchen, Garrett put the kettle on for tea. The silence of the house was deafening, the empty rooms heavy with thoughts he could no longer ignore. He returned to his desk, opening his email to search for something specific, Lauren Hayes' professional profile. He'd seen enough earlier to know she wasn't just another defendant. Her accolades were staggering. Stanford Law graduate. Co-founder of GreenCorps, a platform reshaping access to environmental justice. Featured in Time magazine as one of the top 25 most influential people in sustainability and technology. Garrett shook his head, overwhelmed. And I treated her like she was wasting my time. He clicked through videos of her conference talks. In one, she discussed how technology could eliminate systemic inequities in law and policy. Her words cut through him like a blade. Every person who enters the legal system deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity, no matter their background, their language, or their circumstances. Garrett closed the video and opened a blank document. He began typing, "Proposal for Mandatory Judicial Bias Training Program." The program took shape as he wrote, regular courtroom footage reviews, anonymous feedback from defendants, and bias training led by experts. It wouldn't be comfortable, but comfort wasn't the point. His phone lit up with a text from his daughter, Ellie, a public defender in another state, "Dad, you up? I need to talk, Garrett called her immediately. Ellie's voice carried urgency and pride. "Lauren Hayes was in your court today, wasn't she? Do you even realize who she is?" "I do now," Garrett admitted quietly. Ellie's tone softened. "Her platform has helped 3 of my clients this month alone, Dad. People who would have lost everything otherwise. You always told me judges were supposed to serve justice. Maybe this is your chance to prove it." After the call, Garrett sat in silence. He turned back to his proposal, adding one last line at the bottom, "I commit to reviewing my courtroom footage weekly, seeking input, and acknowledging mistakes publicly as part of my growth." Outside, the first light of dawn crept into the sky. Garrett's hands trembled as he saved the document, but his heart felt steadier than it had in years. Tomorrow, he would begin a new chapter, one he hoped Margaret would be proud of. "You were right," he whispered to her photo. "It's never too late to learn. Or to change." Voluntarily putting himself under such scrutiny. "And what if we find more problems?" Judge Rodriguez asked, her expression firm but curious. "What if the scrutiny reveals deeper issues?" "Then we address them," Harrison replied simply. "We can't claim to serve justice if we're not willing to face our own injustices." He reached for the final piece of evidence, letters from judges across the district who had reviewed his proposal and endorsed it. Among them was a powerful statement from the state Supreme Court's Chief Justice. "I've also spoken with Lauren Hayes," Harrison added, referring to the woman whose case had triggered his transformation. "Her company, Greencore, has technology that could help us analyze and track courtroom behavior. It's a tool that would allow us to identify patterns we've been blind to." The board fell silent as Judge Rodriguez exchanged glances with the other members. "We'll need a recess to discuss this." Harrison nodded and left the room, waiting outside in the marble-lined hallway. It struck him how unfamiliar this moment felt, standing on the other side of judgment, his work and ideas being weighed. When the doors reopened, Judge Rodriguez's expression had softened, though her tone remained professional. "Judge Harrison, this board has never received a proposal quite like this. It's uncomfortable, challenging, and absolutely necessary." She glanced around at her colleagues, who nodded their approval. "We are approving your pilot program with one condition: you must submit quarterly reports detailing every finding, every challenge, and every success." Harrison exhaled slowly, the weight he'd carried lifting slightly. This was the beginning of a long journey, but it was a start. As he gathered his materials, his mind already turned to his next step, preparing for the judicial conference where Lauren Hayes would be speaking. Sometimes, he thought, the best way to serve justice was to admit when you'd failed to deliver it. The State Judicial Conference Center was alive with activity as judges, legal experts, and innovators from across the country gathered for the annual Technology Summit. In a preparation room behind the stage, Lauren Hayes stood with her tablet, reviewing the final notes for her keynote speech. "Ms. Hayes." A young event coordinator stepped into the room. "Judge Garrett is asking if he could speak with you before your presentation. He also wanted to know if he might introduce your session." Lauren blinked, surprised by the request. She had received his formal letter of apology a week earlier but hadn't expected this. "Where is he?" she asked. "In the speaker prep room, just down the hall." When Lauren entered, she saw Judge Garrett standing by a window, looking markedly different from the rigid figure she'd encountered in court months ago. Instead of black robes, he wore a business suit, and his posture was softer, less guarded. "Ms. Hayes," he said, turning to greet her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." "Judge Garrett," Lauren replied evenly. She maintained her professional composure, though her curiosity was piqued. "I received your letter." He nodded. "I know an apology on paper isn't enough. That's why I'm here. I'd like to introduce your session today, but not in the usual way. I want to share what happened in my courtroom that day and how it led to changes in our district." Lauren studied him carefully. "You want to use our interaction as an example?" "Yes," he admitted. "The audience needs to understand that bias isn't just a theoretical discussion for conferences. It's real. It happens every day, and even experienced judges can be guilty of it. Myself included." Setting her notes aside, Lauren crossed her arms. "Tell me about these changes you mentioned." Judge Garrett pulled a folder from the table and handed it to her. "We've launched a new bias training program, and we're already seeing results. Defendant satisfaction ratings have risen by 40%, and more people report feeling heard in our courtrooms." Lauren pulled out her tablet, opening the dashboard for Green Corps' platform. "That's interesting," she said, swiping through user feedback. "We've seen similar patterns in courts using our system. There's a 50% increase in positive feedback from underrepresented communities." For the next several minutes, they exchanged insights, comparing data and findings. Lauren demonstrated how Green Corps' AI flagged subtle patterns in judicial behavior, while Garrett described the impact of the training programs he'd implemented. "What if we combined our approaches?" Lauren suggested, her initial reservations giving way to professional interest. "Your training program, supported by our technology, could create a more complete solution." Judge Garrett's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I hope to discuss. Would you be willing to work with our district as a pilot program?" Lauren allowed herself a small smile. "Judge Garrett, I think we might have something significant here." A knock at the door interrupted them. 2 minutes to the keynote, the coordinator announced. Garrett straightened his tie. "Ms. Hayes, may I introduce your session?" Lauren nodded. "But first, I have one question, that traffic ticket from your court." "Dismissed," Garrett said quickly. "Along with a formal apology to all defendants from that day. We're also reviewing every case from the past month to ensure fairness." As they walked toward the stage, Lauren shared her presentation screen with Garrett, showing him a slide she'd added that morning about their potential collaboration. The room fell silent as Judge Garrett took the podium. "A month ago," he began, his voice steady but raw with honesty, "I made a mistake that changed my entire understanding of justice." From the side of the stage, Lauren watched as he told their story, with humility, vulnerability, and a commitment to change. The audience of judges and legal professionals listened in rapt attention. Many nodded in quiet recognition, perhaps seeing reflections of their own behavior in his words. When Lauren took the stage, she built seamlessly on his introduction, weaving together his personal journey with the broader systemic issues. Together, they showed how human introspection and innovative technology could combine to create meaningful change. The presentation ended with thunderous applause. As judges and legal professionals crowded forward to ask questions, Lauren caught Judge Garrett's eye. He stood off to the side, taking notes, a look of quiet resolve on his face. He nodded to her respectfully. They both knew this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. 6 months later, the Garden Hill Courthouse stood as a model of change. Digital kiosks equipped with Green Corps technology now lined the marble hallways, offering clear, guided pathways for anyone navigating the legal system. Courtrooms featured subtle monitoring tools, empowering judges to reflect on their own behavior and decision-making. Lauren Hayes walked through the entrance, pausing to take in the transformation. It felt worlds away from her first visit, when she'd stood nervously as a defendant. Today, she was meeting Judge Garrett to discuss the next phase of their pilot program. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes," said Linda Holloway, Garrett's clerk, as she greeted her warmly. "You're going to love today's results." In the courthouse's new command center, a space that had once been a dusty storage room, large screens displayed live courtroom data. Analysts and developers worked quietly at their stations, tracking patterns, outcomes, and insights in real time. Judge Garrett, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looked up as Lauren entered. "You're just in time. We've got some fascinating patterns to share from today's traffic court session." The two stood side by side, studying the data. On one screen, a split-screen comparison played, footage from 6 months ago versus today. In the earlier recordings, defendants were rushed through their cases with minimal engagement. In the updated footage, judges listened patiently, defendants presented clear evidence, and decisions were made thoughtfully. "Look at the satisfaction scores," Garrett said, pulling up a chart. "We've gone from 50% to nearly 90%. People feel seen, heard, and respected." Lauren nodded, adding the new data to her tablet. "The state Supreme Court reached out yesterday," she said. "They're interested in scaling this program across the entire state." Garrett smiled but furrowed his brow. "We need to move carefully. Real change takes time, and we'll need to be transparent about the challenges, not just the successes." "Agreed," Lauren replied. "Transparency is key." As the command center buzzed with quiet productivity, Judge Garrett glanced at Lauren. "Did you ever imagine this when you walked into my courtroom that day?" Lauren smiled faintly. "Sometimes, the best innovations start with a moment of injustice." Outside, the sun was setting over the courthouse's classic columns, casting long shadows across the steps. For generations, those steps had led people into a system that often failed to see them. Now, thanks to the unexpected collaboration between a judge and an innovator, they led to a new kind of justice, one that truly saw everyone who climbed them.